transitioning humanitarian session with Viki. Hi, Viki.
Hi, Asel. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here.
Yes, it's one of those months that we want to talk all about failures, and and we're talking about it during like summer season, which I find interesting. So yeah, it's one of those times when I feel like my brain is so on the vacation mode. I was telling Vicky, but anyway, we're gonna go through this. So today we thought that we would talk about why we're so afraid of failure, and also what could be so like resonating with you that you can take away and apply it now, even though you may have ideas of why you are afraid and what is at stake, right? So that's why we really wanted to like have conversation around that with you. So we thought also like Vicky were telling me now that when do we label that this is a failure, right? So maybe Vicky, we can start with that question that you mentioned. When
Mhm.
do you like label for yourself as like, oh damn, this is now a failure?
Yeah. That's a very good question because I think we all, in our past, or for many people also in the present, we have this reaction when we say, "Oh, I failed," or "Oh, I this is a failure," or something, and it's a very, very negative. It's very heavy on us, and it comes probably from some past conditioning that has developed. Through our childhood or maybe later situations, but for me personally, several years ago, when I was starting the coaching journey, there was one thing that one of the coaches presented to me, and that was, what does fail stand for? When I was probably talking about a lot about failure. Maybe I was feeling like a failure. I don't remember the context,
Mm,
but she says, "But you know what failure stands for?" And she said, "This means first attempt in learning." Because
mm,
the words, the first letters of the word. And for me, this was a significant change, in perception and in the mindset. And gradually, I started seeing every so-called failure as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to see what can I learn for myself from here. Because I realized that all these situations are for me to learn something from them. It's not that it failed. You learn from things from there. So this is really my mindset. And as I was mentioning to you, I don't remember when was the last time I labeled something as a failure or I felt like a failure. But I'm sure sometime long ago. But I don't see the world any longer as, oh, I failed. I said, oh,
mm.
well, maybe it didn't work out this time. Let's try it again with the knowledge, with the new knowledge I have. What about you,
Mm.
Asel? How do you label failure, or if at all?
Yeah, so I was thinking that when I used to be very insecure about like who I am and what I do and all the things, I think I would label something a failure if someone else saw it. Like if
Okay.
it was hidden within me, like if like I was personally not
Yeah.
really achieving things, I would be okay with it somehow. Like I would of course beat myself up about it, but it still wouldn't hurt as much as when someone else saw it
Mhm. Yeah.
and then I felt even like worse. And I think that for me, still in my head, is like, oh my God, this is failure because someone else saw it that I couldn't do it. And therefore, I must be. I think that comes back to the reason why it hurt so much back then was because then I felt like I was a failure, right? I think that's one of the things that we take failure so harshly, so difficult, is because we then feel like we're a loser, we're a failure, and we shouldn't be here. I think like one of my clients was telling me recently that she keeps saying to herself that, well, I shouldn't occupy this spot as a human because it's not worth it, or right. I think that level of beating up that can take place when we think about failure. So that's why I don't do that anymore, thankfully. And I think that has changed also over the years a lot because I worked like on my self-worth topics and all the things. So, and that's why it's never like a failure currently. And if it, even if it is, I think it doesn't hurt as much as it used to. And I don't really then think about like failure being a big deal. And I was thinking recently that I made a mistake in my bank accounts and the things, and the money was a big amount and it didn't arrive on time, and people were mad at me. And I was thinking how well I was taking it, meaning that how well I was like reacting to it, instead of like, oh my God, the world has come to an end. People didn't get the money and I am such a bad person. I make these mistakes, right? I didn't even do any of that stuff. I just thought about, okay, how do I solve it? Where do I get the money if this didn't work? Yes, this was my mistake, right? So that's why I was also thinking like, what is the difference between failure and mistake, and how do we treat ourselves in that process? So I think we'll go and talk through all of those things in the future episodes, but I just want to, I think, encourage people to think about like, when do you start labeling it as a mistake or a failure, and how do you treat yourself when you label it as such, right? I think that's an important question to ask. And I think we wanted to talk more here today about why we're afraid of failure. And I think we've talked a bit about it, but I think it's worth to mention what happens when we start looking at something as failure, and how do we react to it, and what do we make it mean. So that's why, Vicky, why do you think like the biggest reasons why we're so afraid that we can fail?
Mhm. Yeah, I think, as I was thinking about it, and I was trying to go to remember the situations, and I you described them already at the beginning, is that we are afraid of failure because to how it's going to make us feel ourselves. We will feel shame, we will feel guilt, like, oh, I'm not good enough, and I'm not succeeding, and I'm not worth it, and all these feelings that are associated. And in particular, as you mentioned, that if somebody else is there, you feel like, oh, but the person sees how I'm incompetent, and all these
Yeah.
things that are associated. So I think this is why we are so afraid to really so-called fail, which again in my mind I'm calling learning attempts in learning, really new attempts in learning. But I think it's also here, maybe it's important to mention the environments in which we work in, and matter maybe also to notice that whether these environments allow us these failures, or that they some sort of punish every failure, which by definition, if we are going deeper into this, means that they don't allow creativity. And maybe we'll talk about the consequences of it. But I think it's also realized, is the environment in which I work in or operate in does it allow me the failure? Does it say like, yeah, you can go, you can try again? Or if it's something that you beat yourself up in spite of having an environment that allows you to so-called fail and try several times until you get it right, or really it's like you beat yourself up and say, well, the environment allows me, but I'm just so harsh with myself. And I think it's a different category, I would say. How do
Yeah.
you see it, Asel?
Yeah, so I was thinking, in addition to what I was saying about like how maybe we feel, we interpret it as I am a failure then, right? I think that's one of the big piece of it. And the other one is also, I think we associate failure as we have no right to fail anymore because we're supposed to know better, because we're now adults, or we are now people who should know how to calculate or how to like analyze things, right? So I think that's another element of it. And the third maybe is also about how we may lose everything, right? I think we talked about it as well in the past, as to like it feels like stakes are high,
Yeah.
I think. And as soon as we tell ourselves stakes are high, then obviously failing, or anything that we consider as failure, becomes so difficult to handle. And then the shame and guilt, like you were saying, are so like heightened in, and I would say even maybe humiliation. And as adults, I think being humiliated is something that's so difficult to bear as well. I have experienced this recently, and I was thinking, my God, I'm so bad at experiencing it. Like I didn't know where to put myself, as I felt like humiliated, even though probably the person had no intention of humiliating me. It's just that the way I perceived it was so difficult to handle, right? So, and I think that's why for us it's so difficult to even try or go for it because of what we believe will happen to us
Mhm.
if we don't do a good job, right? And we always believe like we should do a good job now that we're grown ups
Yeah.
and have our things together. And yeah, so that's why I think the downside of that fear is because we make everything sound so high stake and
Mhm.
difficult, or like either this or nothing kind of a
Yeah.
mindset, then we don't even try basically, and we don't even go for it. And what I have been seeing recently from some of my clients is that we even like we're afraid of even failing ahead of time, meaning
Yeah.
we do everything for not go for it, so much so that we don't think about it, like we don't allow ourselves to think about it. And we believe that if we think about it, then we need to do something about it, and therefore it gets so complicated, so we're like, and then we keep distracting ourselves all the time, right, with other things, or we keep justifying to ourselves why our current situation is a good one, or we keep
Mhm.
like false illusioning ourselves, I guess, for the lack of a better word, because we believe that failure is so difficult to handle. So I don't know if anything comes up in terms of why else.
Yeah, I think you mentioned all the reasons why else. I really just would like to stress that it is the way we look at the situations, but also as we operate individually, but also as we operate in environments, in different environments that might, yeah, be more forthcoming or welcoming of failure or so-called failure, or but be really really strict and penalizing failure. And maybe just as a clarification, I feel maybe would be important to say, as we talked about mistaken failure, I think we are not talking about a situation when there is a you keep on doing the same sort of mistake all the time. I think we are not talking about failure. Failure meaning when you're doing something for the first time, or when there is some project that something, and it doesn't really, the results are not what you intended to be. So I think this is more the framework we are talking about, just for clarification.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also good to mention that. So, in terms of failure here, what I'm thinking of is, so this is something we're wanting to do, and we believe this is what we can do, or we want to go for it. And then we go for it, and then we don't get the same result that we expected. And therefore, we start beating ourselves up, or we believe that others are looking at us and shaming us, and we just feel like we want to go through like I don't know, my extreme scenarios, like go through the earth and then never come back. This kind,
Yes.
this kind of things,
Mhm.
right? So as I was getting prepared for this episode, I was thinking that like, what could I or what could we give to people in terms of like, okay, this is the reason why I want to try it, or I want to go for it, even though I know I have all the fears, right? What could like move people from their place of where they are to where they want to go and move them a bit closer?
Yeah.
So what would you say, Vicky, that we could give something, one specific thing that they could like take it and
Mhm.
like, okay, let me try it.
Okay. Well, for me, it is really the way we look at the positive aspects of the failure or learning the lesson. And if we take a larger look, or if we zoom out of this, I would say that in everywhere we look in our lives, when there is something new, we need to test it, we need to try it. It doesn't, most of us don't get everything right from the first moment on. And this is why I think it's important to try something several times until you get it right. When this is why we have pilot projects, this is why we have test periods, this is why medicaments are being tested, because at the beginning it's not 100% correct. And what I want to say is that one of the most biggest victims, so to speak, of non of being afraid of failure is creativity. If we don't try, we don't allow ourselves the creativity of exploring what is all the things that are out there, all the things that are possible, all the ways that we can make this thing work. So I think that's a very high price to pay. So, and as we know, if you're not creative in a short span of time, we will become obsolete, because life is all about change. So if we don't innovate, if we don't adapt, if we don't seek new solutions and test, eventually we will become obsolete in whatever we are doing. So I would say this is for me probably the biggest lesson, or the biggest, I would say, perspective, that how I look at the so-called failure. Try until you get it right. And okay, try in an environment that allows you the failure, that you know the parameters that allow you to so-called fail, or just learn the lesson, however you label it. So I would say, create a test environment that allows you to do that. Create, maybe parameters, maybe a small project with someone. Maybe you tell the boss that, look, I'm not really sure if it's going to work, but give me 10 weeks, I don't know, give me a month, I will test it, and then we will have a better result for next time. So that's my approach, how I would suggest it. I would be curious to hear how you would address this issue.
So I would be thinking about, so I would be telling people, so what are the feelings you'll feel once you go to fail? Like the ones that we talked about, right? We'll probably feel shame, we'll probably feel guilt, we'll probably feel think that we're not good at it. Probably those are the feelings that will come up. Um, if we don't go for it, though, what are the feelings you will feel? Or what are the feelings you will continue feeling that you don't want to feel? So, a lot of the things I've seen now from my clients is that one of the things that they struggle with is the feeling of numbness,
Mhm,
because they kept suppressing those feeling of wanting this and wanting that, and then keep suppressing that. And
mhm,
once we get to the numb feeling, then life becomes like it doesn't matter, right? And of course I'm talking about extreme situations,
mhm,
but I'm just saying that let's not get ourselves to that point where we numb our feelings and we just don't see the sense
mhm,
and point in living.
mhm,
And I find that it's far more worse for some reason in my head, at least this is my experience, obviously, right? I find it far more worse not to feel than feel the shame and guilt and then getting over it.
yeah.
And as humans, we cannot not feel things, right? We have to feel it, and whatever it is, the bad ones and the good ones, as we label them. So that's why I rather, as personally my own approach is, I rather want to go through it and then feel all those emotions and then getting over them and then feeling like, I did this,
Yeah.
than keep trying to hold myself away from it and keep trying to distract myself otherwise and keep trying to justify to myself why my current situation is a good one and why I should be happy and why this and why that, even though deep down in my truth, I know that that's not what I want, or
Yeah.
that's no longer what I want. Maybe I wanted it at some point, but I no longer want it. And therefore, I rather want to stay true to them and then go through it, whatever it is, and then deal with it, right? So that's why I think for me that has always been this helpful like mindset to think about is what am I afraid of feeling if I go through it, and what am I gonna feel if I don't? And in my case, most times it's like regret, feeling like I made a mistake, or I'm coward, or I'm this person who doesn't really do things truthfully, or I'm not in integrity, and I beat myself up, and I don't want to do that. So
Mhm.
that's why see for yourself, and maybe your feelings are different, right? So you can also be honest with yourself and say, I'm not ready to handle those type of failures, and that's okay too. It's just that being honest with yourself and say, yes, I want this, but I'm not ready for it, or I have other family commitments or other things. So therefore, I'm willing to stay where I am and just owning that truth. And I think that's so much more helpful than keep telling yourself this grand problem of, oh, I can't fail, or I'm not good at this, or I'm this and that, and then we just don't go to the bottom of what is it that's actually going on underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important what you're mentioning. Obviously, it's important to have feelings and identify, because once there is this numbness, I think that's a little bit of an alarming situation, I would say. I would also say that if you are standing in front of the task and you're really afraid to fail, and of course there are all these feeling coming up, one of the might be very scary, but one of the questions good to ask is, what's the worst thing that can happen here? And very often you will come to the conclusion that once you go down, you will say, oh, I failed this project. But okay, and what else? I will fail, and what else? And you will come to the conclusion that very often, not in every case, but very often, once you finalize the thinking about what's the worst that can happen, it is not actually that bad as you as your fear is. So I would also say, you can ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? And you will say, okay, well, this project will be, I don't know, delayed by 2 months, by 3 months, by 4 months. Okay, and so maybe they will need additional budget. Okay, um, what else? So loads of different things that you can think through that will give you direct answers, and maybe those answers will allow you to work and to prepare for the project in a way that you feel better about it, that you feel maybe less afraid to go for it or try.
Mhm, mhm. And also the other thing I think that uh, I was telling Viki before we started is that I think I feel like I'm more immune to failing or immune to being in such situations. And my reaction to those situations as like dramatic as it used. Uh-oh, I you can hear me. So that's why I also like depending on how we approach things, if we know that we're going to, and we know that we're going to be afraid, but we can do that anyway, and then we go and do that. And then most likely what I have experienced from my own experience is that we feel pride for having done it
Yeah,
and having gone through it, even though yes, maybe there might have been other emotions that we felt, but still in the end feeling, yeah, I'm the person who can do it, or I am the person who has done it, and feeling that pride. And I think like the example that I keep thinking about is that going to driving lesson for the first time, right? And feeling the fear and all the things, but still going through it, and then like coming home and like, yes, I have driven today, right? And the same, I think failure can be one of those instances where uh, yes, we can have the fear. Yes, we can feel all of those emotions. But I think we oftentimes don't really think about what other emotions that would make us feel afterwards, having done it, and then giving ourselves so much more credit for how we've done it, how we've done despite all the
yeah,
things that people said would be wrong and how everything would go horribly wrong and we would lose everything, right? But then we haven't, and we've actually created even bigger results, a better results. And I really want people to experience that because I think humanitarians specifically are so good at experiencing those type of euphoric type of gratitude or like pride for having survived certain things or having done things that no one else thought would be possible, right? And I think we're so good at that. And but at some point, I feel like we all get to this place of, oh, maybe now it's time for me to settle and then, do the mundane things. And I think that's great as well. And let's do mundane things as well. But we know that we are also the people who are capable of doing so much more, capable of like risking so much more,
Mhm.
or going through those experiences and getting on the other side powerfully. And I really want us like not to forget those personalities, not to um, forget that we are capable of doing more than what we believe at times is possible. So that's why I love that, like, failure or this type of risky situations available for us to really feel all those emotions again, right? Really feel those things and then
Mhm.
saying, no, I want this in the end so badly that I'm willing to go through this because I know I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very, very powerful thing that you're saying, because I think for most of the humanitarians in professional world, you will do everything for the
Yeah.
project you are doing for the population. You will go to extra mile. You will, so that you can at the end say, look, I've tried everything. I've tried
Yeah.
it all. I've tried, 15 different things in one
Yeah.
year. It hasn't worked. Shall we try more? And in most of the cases you will conclude with your colleagues that yes, so why not apply the same principle for your life? Yes, I tried this
Yes.
and it has worked partly, but let me try. Now I have the knowledge, I have learned. This is why I always say this is an opportunity to learn. I have learned from it, I've prepared myself, I've done the risk assessment and risk mitigation. You take it from your professional world and you try again, and you will see the results. It's bound to be better because you have the knowledge, you have the experience, and you have already prepared yourself a little better. So I think it's really, I would say, let's try to do for ourselves what we do for others. I think it would be probably also a
Yes.
good analogy.
Exactly. I absolutely love that. And also, I was thinking the other day is that we are, I think, in terms of professional way of dealing with things, that we even expect that, like, I don't know, 10-15% of failure is part of the job. And we explain why that is. And we're like very calm about it. And we even like say, well, we did our best. I mean, what do you want us to do, right? We're so good at, I think, telling that in the professional environment, but I think in the personal environment, maybe we're not so good at
Mhm.
approaching it that way, or maybe mm, we're maybe saying like, oh, it's we don't have time for it, or we should be better, or all the things, and therefore we like judge ourselves so much more that then we don't allow our space to be failing or space to be experimenting
Yeah.
really, and then learning from it, or even if we don't learn from it, but at least feel all the feelings and like, okay, we can handle this, and then we keep going, right?
Mhm.
And that's really what we're saying is that we know that we as humanitarians are capable of this, of going through this. We have done it so many times, and I think doing it another doing it again, but with the lower stakes, or telling ourselves that we can handle it instead of making it such a high stake, I
Yeah.
think could be one of the ways to approach it. But of course, in the end, you are the person who needs to decide whether you want to go through it or not. What are your reasons for doing it, right? And also being honest and truthful to those reasons, and then deciding is that for you or not as well. And what I would love to conclude, at least from my side, is to say that um, if you're afraid of like failing, or if you're afraid of whether you are really doing the right thing or wrong thing and all of these things, I think coaching can be very helpful tool for you to really look at all of these things without any judgments, and then deciding what to do with it. I really think of like my coaches as being people who can help me fail safely, and then
Yeah.
me feeling like, apparently I didn't fail at all afterwards,
Yeah.
and then feeling good about it. Of course, this is a jokingly saying, but I'm just saying that there are like coaches, and maybe you have other people around who can help you also go through that in
Yeah,
the way that makes you feel safe in the moment when you're going through it, and then processing those emotions, right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, any last words?
As you were speaking, there was one thing that came to my mind: normalizing failure. So really, maybe let's try to just, I would say, yes, normalize failure, so that we go and try, and learn. I think that would be my advice. And as you say, do get someone to work with. So that someone can be at your side and accompany you, to allow you to go and innovate and experiment.
Yeah, exactly. So we will continue this topic in the future episodes. So if you have any specific questions around failing, or around maybe you have failed and now you're beating yourself up about it, or you are telling yourself never again, or whatever the topics that you're having, please do tell us so that we can help you address it in specific ways. And let us know if you need coaching on any of these topics. So until then, have an amazing week. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you all, and see you next Thursday.
Yes. Thank you, Asel. Thank you, everyone. See you next Thursday. Bye bye.